They married her off like she was settling a debt, not starting a life. No celebration, no joy, just a crowd of witnesses and a piece of paper that sealed her fate. At 16 years old, Eliza May Holloway stood on those courthouse steps with her uncle's hand pressed hard between her shoulder blades, pushing her forward like she might run. And honestly, she thought about it. The boots in the dust, the low voices, the eyes that watched her like she was a spectacle. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction. Someone in the crowd muttered she was too young. Someone else said it was better this way, better him than the alternative. She heard it all because she always did, every whisper, every judgment, every cruel assumption people made when they thought she couldn't hear. The sun beat down like it wanted to witness her humiliation up close. She kept her chin level and her hand steady, but inside she was counting breaths. 4 in, 6 out. It was a trick she'd learned the winter her mother died, when the house went so quiet that the silence scared her more than any amount of shouting ever could. The man waiting for her at the altar didn't even look at her, and that alone felt strange. Jonah Blackwood stood apart from everyone else, tall and impossibly still, hat pulled low, coat buttoned all the way up despite the suffocating heat. He was older, maybe late 20s, and his reputation had arrived in town long before he ever did. Blackwood land, Blackwood money, Blackwood rules. People said his word ended arguments before they even started. People said he never raised his voice because he'd never needed to. People said a lot of things, and Eliza had spent weeks imagining what kind of cruelty a man like that would bring into her life. She'd expected it to announce itself immediately. A smirk, maybe. A grip on her arm that was just a little too tight, a little too possessive. Instead, he just stood there like a wall, like a line drawn in the dirt that nobody dared to cross. The preacher spoke, and names were exchanged. Vows were read from a page that looked older than Eliza felt, and when it came time for Jonah to say his part, he answered quietly. 2 words with no flourish, no performance. When it was her turn, her uncle leaned in close, his breath sour and insistent. Say it. So she did. The ring he slipped onto her finger was plain gold, worn thin from years of use. When Jonah took her hand, his touch was careful and brief, like she was something fragile that might bruise if he wasn't gentle. His fingers were warm and callous from work. Then it was over. No kiss. The absence of it rang louder than anything else that day. The crowd shifted, visibly disappointed that they hadn't gotten the show they came for. Jonah stepped back immediately and released her hand. He tipped his hat to the preacher, then turned to her and said something that shocked her more than anything else that day. You can ride with me, or you can take a minute. It was the first choice anyone had offered her in months, maybe longer. She looked up at him and really looked this time, past the reputation and the rumors. His eyes were dark and hard to read, but they weren't unkind. Tired, maybe. Controlled, definitely. But not cruel. He just stood there waiting without any pressure, hands loose at his sides like he genuinely didn't care which option she picked. She told him she'd ride with him, and he nodded once like that settled it. What surprised her even more was that they didn't actually ride together. He lifted her onto the wagon bench and took the driver's seat with a careful distance between them, like an invisible line he had no intention of crossing. He didn't touch her again. Didn't speak as they pulled away from the courthouse, and the town thinned out into dirt roads and open sky. The silence stretched between them, and Eliza filled it the way she always did when something needed to be said out loud. You don't have to pretend this is pleasant, she told him. He didn't look at her when he answered. I'm not pretending. That was it. 2 words and then nothing else. The Blackwood house sat on the edge of town, set back from the road like it had nothing to prove to anyone. Whitewashed boards, a deep porch, a barn that looked newer and sturdier than the rest. It was the kind of place built by someone who believed in being prepared for anything. Inside, the house smelled clean. Coffee that had gone cold, with soap, the faint scent of bread from earlier that morning. Jonah showed her around with the efficiency of a man giving a tour he'd rather not be giving. The kitchen, the pantry, the pump out back. Practical and straightforward. Then he opened a door at the end of the hall and said something that made her heart skip. "This room is yours. Yours. Not ours. Not the room you'll be expected to share. Yours." The bed was neatly made with a quilt folded at the foot and a small desk positioned by the window. Nothing fancy, but nothing threatening either. She started to ask where he would sleep, and he cut her off gently. "I'll take the front room. We'll eat together if you like, or not. Your choice." She stared at him, trying to understand what kind of game this was, what angle he was playing. He hesitated for just a moment, then added the words that would change everything. "I don't expect anything from you. Not tonight. Not ever." Her chest tightened and she asked the question that had been building since the courthouse. "Then why? Why marry me at all if you don't want anything?" He stopped her with a raised hand, not sharp or aggressive, just firm enough to make his point. "You don't owe me curiosity." Then he left, closing the door softly behind him like he was giving her space to breathe. That night, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the fear to arrive the way it always did. But it didn't come. What came instead was confusion, then slowly, cautiously, something that felt dangerously close to relief. He didn't come to her room. The house stayed quiet. In the morning, she found a plate waiting on the table with eggs and toast, still warm. There was a note written in precise, careful handwriting. "You can sleep in. I'll be back before noon." It was signed with just a single letter. She laughed once, a small startled sound that surprised her. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged that she hadn't expected. Jonah spoke to her with respect, the kind you'd show to an equal, not property. He asked permission before entering her space. When townspeople stared at them in the street, he positioned himself just slightly in front of her. Not touching, never touching, but unmistakably there. In public, he was cold and distant. In private, the house felt safe. At the general store, a woman made a comment loud enough for everyone to hear. "Didn't take long, did it?" Jonah answered without even looking at her, his voice calm, but absolutely final. "Mind your business." Eliza felt something shift inside her chest, something she couldn't quite name yet. That evening at supper, she gathered the courage to ask him what had been weighing on her mind. You could have chosen someone else. Anyone else. He considered this for a long moment before answering. When he finally met her eyes, it was the first time he hadn't looked away first. "Because you needed an out," he said simply. She swallowed hard. From what? From worse men. The truth of it landed heavy between them, settling into the space like something solid and real. Later that night, alone in her room, Eliza realized something that scared her more than the marriage itself ever had. She wasn't trapped here. She was being protected. And she had a very strong feeling that the town had absolutely no idea what kind of line Jonah Blackwood had just drawn in the sand. The town had already decided what kind of wife Eliza would be before she ever had a chance to prove otherwise. They decided she was small and scared and easily controlled. They decided Jonah had bought himself something pliable, something he could shape however he wanted. Eliza noticed how people looked at her now, their eyes lingering on her hands, her waist, the space she occupied next to him. Women tilted their heads with pity sharp enough to draw blood. Men smirked like they'd won bets they'd never actually placed. But Jonah noticed too, and he didn't react the way anyone expected. On the third morning, she found him at the table reading through a ledger, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He glanced up when she entered and immediately stood. "You don't need to do that," she started to say, but he was already pulling her chair out. "Sit," he said, and she did, blinking in surprise. "You're very formal for a man who married a girl half the town thinks he bought," she said. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Half the town is wrong." She wrapped her hands around the coffee he poured, noticing that he'd already added milk the way she preferred. He'd remembered. "Are there rules?" she asked, because there had to be. There were always rules. "Yes," he said, and her shoulders tensed immediately. "Rule 1. You don't owe me gratitude." She stared at him, not sure she'd heard correctly. "Rule 2, he continued in that same even tone. "You don't answer to anyone but yourself in this house." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That's an odd way to run a marriage," she said. "It's the only way I'll run this one." She studied him over the rim of her cup, trying to figure out what he was really after. "And rule 3? He paused, just a beat too long. "If you want to leave, you tell me. I'll make it happen." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "You say that very calmly for a man who'd be humiliated." "I don't scare easily," he said, then quieter, almost to himself. "And I don't cage people." Life in the Blackwood house settled into a rhythm that felt strange precisely because it felt safe. Jonah rose early and worked late. He spoke little, but when he did speak, he listened fully to what she had to say. He never touched her without asking first, and most days he didn't touch her at all. Eliza, who had spent her entire childhood learning to anticipate moods the way you'd anticipate storms, found the predictability almost unsettling in its gentleness. One afternoon she followed him out to the barn, and he said without even turning around that she didn't have to. "I know," she replied. He waited. "I want to." That simple statement earned her a nod of approval. She learned quickly, maybe too quickly, how to mend tack, how to read weather in the way horses shifted and stamped. How Jonah worked, methodical and precise, never wasting movement or words. "You watch like you're memorizing everything," he said once. "I am," she admitted. "For what?" "In case I need to remember how a good man behaves." He went very still at that, and when he spoke his voice was careful. "Then don't build me into something I didn't promise to be." She smiled faintly. "I'm not." At the store, the whispers got sharper and more invasive. A woman leaned in too close and asked if he locked the bedroom door at night. Eliza smiled sweetly and told her he didn't need to. When Jonah heard about it later, he asked if she wanted him to handle it. "No," she said. I liked watching her try to figure it out. That earned her something rare, a real smile that changed his entire face. They ate supper together most nights, not romantic exactly, just practical. Soup and bread and sometimes meat. The conversation would drift from weather patterns to town gossip to long comfortable silences that didn't feel awkward at all. One evening she asked him directly if it bothered him that people thought he was cruel. He considered the question seriously. "No," he said. "Then, does it bother you?" "It bothers me that they think I'm weak," she admitted. He met her eyes across the table. "They'll learn," he said simply. "How?" "By watching you." The next test came at church, when she hesitated at the door. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," he said. "I know you don't like crowds." "I don't like bullies," he corrected, offering his arm without actually touching her. "And church has plenty." Inside, the pews creaked with the weight of everyone's attention. During the sermon, a woman leaned forward with false sweetness and said it must be strange marrying into power. Eliza replied quietly that it must be strange mistaking power for ownership. The woman's face flushed red. After the service, the town's loudest troublemaker blocked their path and made a comment about Eliza's age. Jonah stepped forward, just enough to make his point. "She's my wife," he said evenly. "And you're done speaking." The man scoffed and asked what would happen if he didn't stop. Jonah didn't raise his voice or make threats. He simply looked at the man, and that was enough. They walked out together. Outside, Eliza's hands were shaking. "You all right?" Jonah asked. "Yes," she said, exhaling slowly. "I think I'm more angry than scared." "That's good," he told her. "Why is that good?" "Because anger sharpens judgment." She laughed despite herself. "You say things like you expect me to take notes." "I do." That night she found something on her desk that made her chest go tight. A deed to a small parcel of land, made out in her name. She found him on the porch and held up the paper with shaking hands. "What is this?" "An option," he said. "If you ever want a life that doesn't include me." The world tilted sideways. "You're giving me an exit," she whispered. "Yes. But why would you do that?" "Because I don't want you staying out of fear." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You're not what they think you are." "I don't care what they think," he said, really looking at her. "I care what you choose." She folded the deed carefully and told him the truth. "I'm not leaving." He nodded once. "Noted." That was all he said, but later when she was alone, Eliza pressed that deed against her chest and understood something crucial. She wasn't staying because she was trapped or because she had nowhere else to go. She was staying because she wanted to see what kind of man gives someone freedom before he ever asks for affection. She was staying because for the first time in her life, someone had made actual space for her to grow into whoever she wanted to be. The town would learn eventually that Jonah Blackwood wasn't the danger they'd imagined. He was the line they should never have crossed, and Eliza was beginning to understand that she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever given her credit for. This was just the beginning.